Hi, my name's Dorrie Brooks. I'm an architect with Jones Whitsett Architects in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And we've been working for the last year on behalf of the city of Holyoke to design the two new middle schools that the community is going to be talking about and will be voting on whether or not to fund in the spring of this year. So we wanted to present a little bit about the project so that you have some idea what the project looks like, feels like, and what it will do for the city of Holyoke. So right here we have the first two images, and we're going to get into these in detail, but just so you understand, this is a two middle school project. The goals of the project are to go back to the structure the school system used to have with pre-kindergarten through 5th grade, and then a middle school, and then a high school. That system is they've moved away from over time, but it's been agreed upon throughout the city that, as Dr. Zreik has mentioned, that that's a system that would really help, because currently middle school students are not really well addressed in the current configuration where they're actually in a K-6, 7, and 8 system where you have middle school students in elementary schools. So the intention here is to actually create an age-appropriate middle school experience for all middle school students in Holyoke. The project will also require demolishing the existing Pinck school and putting a new school up at the Pinck school site. And constructing a second school at the corner of Chestnut and Cabot Street, which is currently a vacant block. So very much an important part of the project is that the equity of having two very similar schools offering very similar resources to all of their population, and have those be similarly sized. Rather than have one mega school like some communities do, the intention is to have two 550 student schools in two different parts of town, but both serving the majority of the population, the community being sort of centrally located. And then to build both schools over a 2-year period, opening in the fall of 2022. So we actually joined the project after the district had already done a great deal of work. They began working on this project in about 2016, starting to look at all of the school district facilities to see how they were faring, which ones were most costly to operate, and how the configuration of grades and teachers was working. And that's when they discovered a lot of important things, including the fact that some of the building facilities were in very, very poor shape. That led to a study done by an independent agency looking at all the facilities that really identified 4 buildings that really needed to be taken offline eventually and replaced with new facilities. As a part of that, they also came to this idea of actually building middle school experience because they were aware of the fact that a lot of teachers were stretched trying to teach across grade levels, and they saw that there'd be greater efficiency in organizing the district differently. They estimate that the efficiency of restructuring and taking offline the older schools in the district would save the district $4.5 million, some of which is just a one-time savings and some of which is a continual savings that will add up over time. So here is a diagram showing the 3 schools other than Lynch that will be taken offline. Lynch has already been brought offline. The intention is ultimately to close Metcalf, replace Peck, and close Lawrence. Lawrence is a beautiful building, a historic building, and a building that the city knows that it has a great deal of value in, but that is actually not really well suited to 21st century learning. So the hope is that Lawrence could be repurposed as housing or serve other purposes to the city. It's a really lovely building in a historic district. Peck, the other school, is less valuable and less historic. And that's the project that many people are familiar with because they've already seen. It's actually not that old a building, but it was poorly designed originally. So here's some images that give you a sense of what Lawrence School looks like. A lot of why we're brought into the project is that we work with public school projects around the western part of the state. And we're very familiar with the state's guidelines for educational program and how they're supposed to be suited within a school. And the challenge with schools like Lawrence in adapting them is that the current guidelines for what's needed for various programs have very specific space requirements. And those requirements don't fit well in a building like Lawrence that was built in 1930. So you can see that not only is this an older facility, with a need for complete replacement of all of its infrastructure. It's also laid out in a way that was appropriate in the early 20th century for how education was presented, but isn't appropriate today. Pinck was actually built in 1973, and it's a very different era of architecture, design, and construction. It's a very plain building. Diagrammatically, it was sort of designed around the idea of these octagons. And if you've been in Pinck, you know what that's like. Very poor sight lines. It's essentially a double-loaded quarter that's going around in a circle constantly. So that's always been a management problem for the district. And materially, it's a pretty poorly constructed building that wastes a lot of energy. So it's been viewed as an operational challenge for the district for some time. And both the state and the city have really advocated for its demolition and replacement for some time. When we were brought in, we also questioned whether or not these two schools were necessarily the appropriate site for new projects. And we looked a little bit further afield to be sure that there weren't other places that would be best for these new schools. And we also looked at the idea of a single mega school. And those ideas really were vetted with the advisory building committee and the city pretty carefully. And we looked at other sites, including Whiting Farms Road, where there was an undeveloped parcel, McMahon School, which seemed to be a large enough parcel to support a larger school, the Lynch School site, and which we only looked at because we'd heard that there were people wondering. We know that there's a lot of interest in Lynch. And then this vacant parcel at the corner of Chestnut and Cabot Street, which has become one of the two sites that we're going to be building on. What we do in that process is really evaluate site issues, cost issues, circulation issues, and also fit, whether or not that educational program can fit in one of those existing buildings. And for each of those sites, there were issues except for the Cabot and Chestnut site, which has a lot of advantages, being centrally located and also fitting with the city's master plan for redevelopment already. So that's why that site was carried forward and the others were not. So here we have after a certain phase of design thinking and exploration, we narrowed the options to 4 project potentials. A renovation of Lawrence, a renovation of Pinck, or new construction at Chestnut and Cabot, and new construction at Pinck. And you can see on the left an image that shows you a map of the city of Holyoke and where all the students in Holyoke come from. And we used that map, actually we developed it with the city as we were exploring sites, and we discovered, quite to our amazement, but not to the districts, that really it was logical to put these 2 middle schools in the downtown area, because that's how it's best going to serve the number of students in the district who are going to the middle schools. So that's really just an appropriate understanding of why these sites really rose to the top of the list. So in the next phase of our work, we already estimated what it would cost to explore a renovation or new construction at these sites, but also what advantages it has to the city to do these options, because it's both about cost but also about functionality. And you can see in this chart that in exploring that, we did find that there were a lot of advantages to building new on a vacant parcel. There's no concern about demolition. There's no concern about having to move students to a different location while you're doing the construction. There's no concern about additional historic reviews or anything like that. So that clearly was a winner here. The other winner was Pinck New, because again, the concept of renovation comes with a lot of problems that a lot of people don't understand, from the distance looking at it. So we saw the advantages to these with the advisory building committee, and then we went through a process of pricing those out. And carried this design further and presented it to the MSBA, which is the Massachusetts School Building Authority, who have already agreed to fund what will roughly be about 60% of the project. They knew they were involved in the project, but they didn't necessarily know they were involved in 2 projects. And we presented the idea of 2 projects to the MSBA, and they supported that idea. And then in October, we came back to the City Council, and the City Council supported the additional exploration of the Pinck site and kind of gave the project their support as well at that point in time. So we carried the project forward and entered into a new phase of design focusing now on these 2 new schools, and the idea of 2 schools that would be similar and equitable. And then we started to fill out the details of that design. And the process of doing that for us involves a great deal of listening, opening up to the community through a number of different public events. We held 4 community listening sessions, as well as meeting with students at the middle school and high school level, meeting with district staff, and then convening a group of about 20 teachers for about 5 sessions where we really explored different sets of plans and different ideas and tried to really be sure that the school that we designed really suited the city's needs. Moving forward, what we found in that process and in talking to the community, that since Holyoke hasn't had a new school in over 30 years, it was a really big eye-opening experience for people to see what they didn't have at the middle school level in Holyoke. We actually visited a number of schools in the eastern part of the state and in western Massachusetts. And we found particularly that these kinds of spaces that provide for 21st century learning with new technologies that allow project-based learning, that really engage kids in science, that allow learning to happen everywhere in the school and not just in a classroom, and to have really positive, environmentally rich spaces with good daylighting and warm materials that really make students feel cared for and welcome and safe. Those are things that people weren't seeing in their experience in Holyoke, and those became really important things to a number of people in the community as we worked through the project. For us as designers, the most critical space in the school is the classroom, because while things have changed, it's still kind of home base for students. And we spent a great deal of time working with the teachers to explore what your typical classroom would look like. And we came to the idea with the district of creating a school that's based on distinct communities. So rather than being one of 550 students, we'll break it down into 2 communities per grade, where every student is then one of 90 students in a grade level cluster. And that cluster would consist of 4 to 5 classrooms. But what's really changed from the 1950s to today is, instead of it just being a row of classrooms, that community area consists of different size classrooms. You have your main classrooms for 24 students, and you also have rooms that are half-size classrooms and small group rooms. And this allows the school to bring services that individual students might need closer to where they're learning. It's a pull-in system rather than pull-out. And it allows those students and teachers to work closely as a team. So you know your student in the school has the support of 4 or 5 teachers at all times who are keeping a close eye on their learning. And it builds relationships, and that's a really fundamental part of success for students. So this idea of a 21st century grade level community is a hallmark of the school, and it's something that we then carried out as consistently and effectively as possible throughout both schools. So I'm now going to pass this over to Kristian Whitsett, my partner at Jones Whitsett Architects, to talk a little bit more about the floor plans.